You are about to hear from Katarina Pejovic. She has been a member of Croatia's radical left party, the Workers' Front, since 2017 and served as a member of parliament, the Sabor, from 2020 to 2024. Beyond politics, she is a professor in the Department of Cultural Studies at the University of Rijeka and also a musician who once performed in several bands. She's not only a brilliant intellectual, but also a very kind person. In our conversation, we explore her observations from parliament and Croatian politics, the broader challenges facing Croatia, Europe, and the world, her predictions for the coming years, and the connections between academia, politics, and music. And now, here is my conversation with Katarina Pejovic. You were a member of parliament until recently. Looking back on your time in parliament, what was the biggest surprise for you about how politics actually works in Croatia, if anything?
Oh, well, that is a difficult question for starting, of course, for start. But let me sum this up. Maybe the difficult and most shocking um, experience during this parliamentary mandate would be the acknowledgement that we are in the very particular situation over there. When you are watching this over the television, you can say that we are constantly fighting, that left is fighting right, and that this opposition is seriously opposed to the main parliamentary majority. But actually, when you are a member of the radical left party, you can see how this left center is actually very much synchronized with the dominant political stream. And this dominant political stream is related to economics, to economy, because we are we are struggling, left-right opposition is struggling, left opposition toward right mainstream politics is struggling on the identity questions, and we are very much opposed to each other. But when it comes to economy, actually, there is no opposition. And that is the most shocking acknowledgement for me during my mandate, because nobody spoke about economic questions, and we are constantly struggling on identity politics, which is of course important. I cannot say that those identity questions are not important, but they are derived from the economic problems and related to them, and they are not separate, but so-called left center completely separates them. So you have the feeling that there is no disagreement on how, for example, Croatian economy should be dealt with, should be politically framed. And we have many problems, as you probably know. We are a tourist country, and our economy is limited to services. When economy is limited to services, actually, there is there exists a problem of non progress, of lack of, I would say, lack of progress. So when we are a socialist country, we had actually many economists, for example, maybe you are familiar with the name Branko Horvat, one of our famous economists, measured how Croatia, socialist Croatia, developed in Yugoslav socialism, and how we were catching up those big and great Western countries. And today, actually, we are stagnating, and even we are going backwards in some sectors. So one of our prominent Croatian economists actually come to the conclusion, Josip Tica from Economic Institute, that Croatia have 27% lower standard than 40 years ago. He said that in 2015, that we had 20% lower standard according to the salary per purchasing power in Republic of Croatia than 40 years ago. So we can conclude that we are actually stagnating.
Croatia has certainly its own dynamics, and the same applies to the Croatian parliament and the center left as well. But do you think that what you experienced, or do you think that what you observed in the Croatian parliament is also true more generally in Europe or elsewhere when it comes to, for example, the role of identity politics in left politics?
Definitely, you can see the similar problem in German politics, where, for example, Die Linke in one period lost its force, and there was a very important split within the party because of the question what should be the left politics today. I do not agree with Sarah Wagenknecht on her points of view, but this split is important because split between those who claim that they are leftists and those who claim that the left in general lost its touch with the people is something that we should acknowledge. But the problem is not solved with this acknowledgement. We must very precisely detect what should be the new type of left politics today. I repeat, I don't agree how Sarah Wagenknecht dealt with this question, but this question arises in many left parties today across the Europe. We
Yes.
can see those very famous and very important examples in Greece and in Spain, where actually left seized the power and what problems they were dealing with. And we can see that any left progress is blocked because of the capital, because of capital fights back, so to say. This is a very simple way to picture this conflict, but actually it is what is happening. Many leftist theoreticians described this path that would come as a problem to any left party seizing the power, this blockade of the capital that is fighting back against this progressive politics. For example, when you want to share a bigger slice of cake to social programs, to programs that fight for equal standards, when you try to limit capital forces, for example, on the question of ecological crisis, and to force them to produce in different kind of way. When you try to, I don't know, try to engage in very progressive education and so on and so forth, you are dealing with these problems on the level of politics, but also on the level of on economy, so-called blockade of the capital, and
Yes.
strike of the capital, and you don't have enough money. Investments are gone from the country. You have the problem with foreign capital leaving the country, and you are faced with lack of support domestically, and you lose your power. You have two options. Fred Bloch described his process, a very prominent leftist thinker and economist. You are forced with two solutions: either to cope with the capital, to bend your head, to acknowledge that you are defeated, and to carry on with the economic relations that was established before you came to the power, or you fight with the capitalist forces, with the foreign capital, domestic capital, and you lose your investments, and you have a problem with finances, and you are faced with the lack of support from your supporters, your electional body. So if we don't have any choice, because those are not choices, we must today very clearly communicate what could be the change. And people must understand what could be the change and what are the problems when we are facing with this several phases of progressive politics. And left parties, especially left-center parties, but also left parties as Syriza and Podemos, actually did not communicate about those problems before seizing the power. Few of the very important thinkers and politicians, Kostas Lapavitsas, for example, in Greece, communicated those problems, but party comrades usually force those progressive thinkers to keep their voices low, because they won't seize the power if they are communicating these problems. For example, Lapavitsas very precisely communicated that Greece must leave Eurozone if they have to stop their politics before them, politics of shortcuts and all those politics that they were against, where they are seizing power. But Tsipras and others didn't listen and tried to firstly seize the power. Then they will communicate those problems, and never this chain of things never occurred actually. When you are thinking, well, we will seize the power, then we will communicate those complicated things, actually then you are already in the very bad position, and you don't have the strings anymore to pull hard solutions to communicate what should be done, because we don't have this option and that option, and people are not prepared for any kind of cuts. And if you are very dedicated to progressive politics, in one point of that politics, you will be faced with the cuts because capital will react, and you will have to fight with the capitalist forces.
Yes. And eventually he left the party, he left Syriza and
He
founded.
wasn't a member. Lapovitsas never became a member of Syriza. He was in those circles, but not party member. But actually, yes, he went he left this politics and didn't participate in their politics when they seized the power.
Yeah. So you already mentioned some problems, some challenges, but do you think the left in Croatia or in Europe is adapting fast enough to today's global challenges? Things like increasing inequalities, increasing economic inequalities, technology, newly emerging technologies, the environment, climate change, or security? For example, what lessons or insights can you provide from the workers' front?
Well, a lot of questions. Maybe I will focus on a few things that you mentioned that are very important today. Definitely, we should raise the question of security and question of militarization of Europe today and say a few words about how to cope with this today's very unpleasant. It is an understatement, but let's keep it that way. Unpleasant course of actions, and we have the war within European borders, and we have what some should call genocide in the Palestine. So those politics we are facing today, also in Croatia, we are entering the phase in Croatia politics where again it is military complex became very important issue.
Yeah.
So those questions should be raised. Also, questions that you mentioned on ecology, because as scientists warn us, we are approaching the point of no return within this question and problem of global warming. So if we are listing those problems of militarization, ecological crisis, maybe to add this problem of even economy from the center of Europe and the periphery, and migrations that are the result of this uneven development. We are facing with very difficult times where we should be thinking about alternatives in politics, and debates on alternatives should be raised, because today even thinking about a capitalist alternative raises some brows, and many many scientists think that it is not something that we should be talking about, that the topic of progressive politics should not be within the academy, which is, from my point of view, very um, blur and uneven point of view. So we should be thinking about open the debate on those issues within the Europe, not closing the doors and trying to cope with some autistic academic work that doesn't communicate with the people.
Yes, actually, you are a professor of cultural studies and also a politician. To what extent does academic research inform real decisions? In other words, do you think academic research has an impact on real world politics, decisions, votes, budgets, and laws?
Unfortunately, in Croatia, academic work has a negative impact also. That is something that we should also raise as a question. For example, Croatian Academy is faced with the problem of Second World War, and politics is asking academics to give their point of view on some Ustasha's symbols. Ustasha's were collaborators, Nazi collaborators in Croatian politics during the World War II. And those issues are dealt also within the academic community without enough debates and without the openness needed for such academic works. So what Academy concluded, Croatian Scientific Academy, was something that was not very much useful for Croatian people. They came out with a solution that those symbols could be used within specific contexts, and they, for example, came out with a component of two symbolism, so to say, within today and within World War II context, but that didn't solve the problem. We are today only left with one context, and that is unfortunately very serious historical revisionism, which is not specific only for Croatia. Maybe you are acquainted with the declarations that are the product of Euro Parliament. Some of them really tried to revise the history of World War II in a very bad manner. So we are today also faced with a right-winger politics in European Parliament that is revisionist, and that are dealing with the World War II history in very complicated and not a good way. So we are today in Croatia constantly in the public fight on those issues, as we are in the World War II, and nothing happened in between. Unfortunately, we are constantly fighting about those symbols, something that should be resolved a long time ago, and we should today know which side won the war, and which side wasn't good, and present something that is the worst phase of the history, and that is Nazism and fascism. But constantly we are fighting on those issues. Again, I think that those issues are important, but academy is completely left out from the questions of economy and economic development of Croatia. We are totally deindustrialized. We have one of the greatest emigration in Europe. Unfortunately, I don't know what is the state in Turkey, but in Croatia, 17.6% of the working age population migrated from Croatia, and the average is 3.3%. That's huge immigration that we are facing with, and unfortunately, we are constantly told from the top of our politics that things are good, that we have good wages, that we have good working conditions, but unfortunately, statistics doesn't prove that. We have half of the medium European salary. Till recently, we had 3 times lower medium salary than European medium salary. Today, we have 2 times lesser wage, but of course, actual politics is presenting that as something good because till yesterday we were even worse. But this statistics on the migration is the most important because when people are migrating, that is the surely a symptom of that something is wrong, that we don't have a good life conditions over here, because why would somebody go abroad if everything is good in his or her domestic country? That is then also the question of uneven development. Again, one term that is familiar in a Marxist theory, but also in economy. Migrations are actually outcome of the uneven development. Periphery is undeveloped. The center of Europe is developed. Also, we have war on the periphery and semi-periphery. So people migrate. This is not something that is bad, but when we have that problem of closed borders and documents as a Pact of Asile and Migration, that is for left politics actually something that should be called a pro-racist a document, that Pact of asylum and migrations. When you have this kind of politics that is forcing very brutal force, that is forcing very brutal approach on migrant, and that is actually promoting a force against people that are moving, then this is a really serious problem. And this problem should be also something that academy is thinking about and dealing with.
Migration of young people is such a big concern for some other left-wing politicians in some other EU countries as well. In the past, I used to talk some Greek politicians who were also very anxious about this situation. And you mentioned Turkey. Of course, here Turkey has the same problem as well, but it is not just it's just not economic reasons, but also the political reasons that young people are basically leaving the country. Um, this is perhaps the difference between some EU countries and Turkey. Now, I would like to
Of
ask a
course,
type of
again, economy is related to these pro-totalist regimes and politics. So
certainly, certainly, I understand what you mean. Um, Now I would like to ask a type of question that actually I really like for brainstorming. Um, 2 decades from now, if we jump to 2045, let's say, what do you realistically expect to see? in Croatia or in Europe or in the world. I mean, not what you wish for, but what you think might really happen in Croatia or in Europe or in the world by 2045, whether politically, economically, or culturally. Do you think by then, I mean, we will be living in a very different world or more or less in a similar one?
Well, this prophet-like thinking is always something that is very difficult, of course,
It
and
is, of
anything
course.
we say will be maybe false, because that is something that we really cannot see. But there are trends, and we can follow those trends and conclude what are the problems that we will be faced with, certainly, and one of them is ecological crisis, because there is no way to end this ecological crisis if we are not dealing, or we are not prepared to end a capitalist form of production. And that is something that is not on the horizon. We cannot see the changes within this way of production. So it is easier to imagine the end of the world than the end of the capitalism, as it is oftenly said. But if we cannot imagine the end of the capitalism, we will be faced with the end of the world, so to say. So we must think about these alternatives. And theoreticians that are dealing with those problems recently are often from the Sweden Academy or Danish and those countries of that we want to believe that are with a higher democracy. For example, in Croatia, we are always picking them as some kind of better example. In those countries, theoreticians such as Andreas Malm or Søren Mau, for example, are thinking about those alternatives. And really what we can read from their studies is ton of the informations about why we should end this type of capitalist production, and why this problem of ecological crisis we won't go away if we don't end the capitalism. But again, this is an academic work. What is present in the everyday politics does not synchronize with this very important insights that we are maybe aware of, but obviously politics is not. And every ecological global economical and ecological global politics are totally therefore they are lead with either optimism or something that should be called stupidity, because it is obvious that we are coming to the point of no return. And for example, those theoretical ecologists warned us that for the 70% of the carbon dioxide is only 100 firms, global firms are responsible. So if we deal with those 100 big global companies, we could actually end this bad circle. But there is no way to to end those big companies and to force them to produce differently if we don't have a very organized and strong global movement that could stop this kind of madness actually within the global scale. So there is something that really asks for international connections, for participation of academics as you and me, but on the European and global scale, and also connection within academy, but also connections of academy with the people, with the populace, with the force, with a very strong movement. So we have to organize and to debate about progressive alternatives and solutions. That would be the best way to try to stop these global trends.
Absolutely. My final question. You have a background in music in Croatia. You used to play in different bands. Given that, how does Katarina Pejovic see the interaction between music and politics today?
As you can see, this is my
Yes, yes, I,
guitar
I see that. Absolutely.
strategically put on the in front in
Yes,
behind me.
I
But
saw.
okay, yes, I think that music can do a lot because maybe some things are in the theory not so intuitive. Actually, Marx said that many things are in historical materialism and this critique of political economy are counterintuitive. Actually, they are against common day understanding of how money functions, how work is structured, how we can understand this kind of um, capitalist circle. But when you're trying to come to the larger group of people and to communicate some things, you can really do some of the work can be done within this popular culture because people are intuitively understand that solidarity is good, that equality is good, that we should be organized on those bases. And music is something, one part of our life that could communicate those basic and very simple things easily. And I believe that there is no person in the world that thinks that solidarity and equality is something bad. But when we are trying to analyze what is actually solidarity and what is equality, then we have to do some academic work. And
The
music is only,
interpretations are different.
definitely, and music is only one way of saying things in an easy way.
Yes, great. Thank you very much, Katerina Pejovic, for joining this interview.
Thank you, Akif, for having me with you today.
I believe in the power of listening and in open, constructive conversations like the one I just had with Katerina Pejovic, conversations that remind us a better future is possible. For more dialogues like this, join me here at the Left Agora by following the channel. Until next time, let the Agora echo with new voices.